In the scorching heat of Afghanistan's unforgiving mountains, where death lurked behind every boulder and the enemy could strike from 1,000 yards away, a group of elite Navy SEALs thought they knew everything about survival. They had been through the most brutal training on Earth, faced impossible odds in countless missions, and earned their place among America's most feared warriors. But none of them suspected that their greatest protector wasn't standing beside them in battle gear. She was a quiet woman who cleaned their barracks, served their meals, and seemed to fade into the background like a ghost. What they didn't know was that this unassuming figure had once held the record as America's deadliest sniper, with more confirmed kills than any soldier in modern history. Her secret would remain buried until the day everything went wrong, and these battle-hardened warriors discovered that the woman they had barely noticed was the only thing standing between them and certain death. The morning sun cast long shadows across Forward Operating Base Chapman as Sarah Martinez moved through the compound with practiced invisibility. At 42, she had perfected the art of being unremarkable. Her graying brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her worn khaki uniform hung loose on her frame, and her eyes remained downcast as she went about her duties. To the elite Navy SEALs stationed at the base, she was just another civilian contractor, part of the background noise of military life in Afghanistan. None of them knew that less than 5 years ago, those same quiet hands had held a Barrett M82 rifle with deadly precision, or that those downcast eyes had once peered through scopes to eliminate threats from distances that would make even seasoned snipers shake their heads in disbelief. Sarah Martinez had been Staff Sergeant Sarah Ghost Martinez, the most lethal sniper in the United States military, with 147 confirmed kills across 3 tours of duty. But that life felt like it belonged to someone else now. The transition from warrior to invisible had been deliberate and necessary. After her final tour ended in 2018, Sarah had struggled to find her place in a world that suddenly felt too loud, too chaotic, too safe. The nightmares came every night, bringing with them the faces of the men she had killed and the friends she had failed to save. The military offered counseling, medication, and a comfortable retirement, but none of it could silence the ghosts that haunted her dreams. So she had chosen a different path. Using her veteran status and security clearance, she had taken a civilian contractor position that would keep her close to the military world she understood while allowing her to disappear into anonymity. For the past 3 years, she had worked at various forward operating bases throughout Afghanistan and Iraq, handling logistics, maintenance, and support services. The work was mundane, invisible, and exactly what she needed. At FOB Chapman, her official title was Support Services Coordinator, which meant she did whatever needed doing. She organized supply deliveries, coordinated with local contractors, managed the dining facility, and ensured the base ran smoothly behind the scenes. The work kept her busy enough to avoid dwelling on the past, and the constant presence of active military personnel provided a strange comfort, even if they barely acknowledged her existence. The Navy SEALs of SEAL Team 7 had arrived at Chapman 3 weeks ago as part of a classified operation targeting high-value Taliban commanders in the region. Sarah had watched them arrive with the swagger and confidence that marked all elite special operations units. They were younger than her, most in their late 20s or early 30s, and they carried themselves with the assurance of men who had never met a challenge they couldn't overcome. Lieutenant Commander James Hawk Richardson led the 12-man team with the kind of natural authority that made other men want to follow him into battle. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing and a reputation for bringing his men home alive from impossible situations. His second-in-command, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Bull Thompson, was a mountain of a man whose booming laugh could be heard across the compound and whose loyalty to his team was absolute. The rest of the team was equally impressive. Petty Officer First Class David Reaper Collins, the team's primary sniper, whose ego was as large as his reported kill count. Petty Officer Tommy Kid Martinez, the youngest member at 24, whose technical skills with explosives were matched only by his need to prove himself worthy of the SEAL Trident. Petty Officer Jake Spider Williams, the communications specialist whose quick wit and faster hands made him invaluable in tight situations, and 7 other highly trained operators, each a specialist in their own right. Sarah observed them during their daily routines, noting their habits and personalities with the same attention to detail that had once helped her predict enemy movements. She served their meals in the dining facility, cleaned their quarters, and organized their equipment deliveries, all while maintaining the invisibility that had become her shield against the world. The SEALs treated her with the casual indifference that most military personnel showed toward civilian contractors. They were polite but distant, professional but uninterested. To them, she was simply part of the infrastructure that kept their world running smoothly, no more noteworthy than the generators that powered their communications equipment or the water purification systems that kept them supplied. This arrangement suited Sarah perfectly. She could observe and analyze without being observed in return, could feel connected to the military community without having to explain her past or confront the person she used to be. The work was honest, necessary, and allowed her to contribute to the mission without having to carry a weapon or take another life. But, even in her new role, old habits died hard. Sarah couldn't help but notice things that others missed. She saw how Petty Officer Collins, the team's sniper, consistently pulled his shot slightly to the right during range practice, a flaw that would prove dangerous at extreme distances. She observed how the team's patrol patterns had become predictable after 3 weeks of operations, creating vulnerabilities that enemy forces could exploit. She noted how their confidence, while admirable, was beginning to border on overconfidence, the kind that got good soldiers killed. Most concerning was what she observed during the intelligence briefings that she sometimes attended in her capacity as support coordinator. The Taliban forces in their area of operations had grown increasingly sophisticated in recent months, employing tactics and equipment that suggested training and support from outside sources. The enemy was learning, adapting, and becoming more dangerous with each engagement. The SEALs, however, seemed to view each successful mission as confirmation of their superiority rather than recognizing the evolving threat. They had been trained to be aggressive, to take the fight to the enemy, and to trust in their superior training and equipment. These were admirable qualities that had served them well in countless operations, but Sarah had seen enough combat to know that overconfidence could be as deadly as any enemy bullet. During her evening rounds, Sarah would often pause outside the team's briefing room, listening to their discussions about upcoming operations. The walls were thick enough to muffle most conversation, but she could hear the tone of their voices, the easy confidence and casual banter that spoke of men who believed themselves invincible. It reminded her of her own early days in combat, before she had learned that the enemy always got a vote in how operations unfolded. One evening, as she was organizing supply inventories in her small office, Sarah overheard a conversation between Lieutenant Commander Richardson and Chief Thompson that made her blood run cold. They were discussing intelligence reports about a high-value target in a village 12 kilometers north of the base, a Taliban commander who had been orchestrating attacks against coalition forces throughout the region. The mission parameters were straightforward: a nighttime raid to capture or kill the target, with extraction before dawn. It was exactly the kind of operation that SEALs excelled at, combining stealth, speed, and overwhelming firepower to achieve their objectives. But Sarah heard something in the intelligence briefing that made her instincts scream warnings that no one else seemed to recognize. The target location was too perfect, too easily accessible for such a high-value individual. The intelligence was too clean, too detailed, too convenient. In her years of combat experience, Sarah had learned to be suspicious of operations that seemed straightforward, because the enemy was just as capable of setting traps as coalition forces were of walking into them. But she was no longer Staff Sergeant Martinez, the sniper whose tactical insights were valued and sought after. She was Sarah Martinez, civilian contractor, whose job was to make sure the dining facility was stocked and the supply deliveries arrived on schedule. Her observations and concerns were neither requested nor welcome, and she had no official channel through which to voice them. So she remained silent, filing away her concerns while going about her daily duties with the same invisible efficiency that had become her trademark. She served breakfast to the SEAL team the next morning, noting the excited energy that always preceded a major operation. The men were focused, professional, and eager to close with the enemy once again. As she cleared their plates and wiped down their tables, Sarah found herself studying each face, memorizing details she hoped she would never need to remember. She had been present for too many pre-mission briefings that had ended with empty chairs and flag-draped coffins, and her instincts were telling her that this mission carried risks that went far beyond what the intelligence reports suggested. But those instincts belonged to a person she was no longer supposed to be, and she forced herself to focus on the mundane tasks that defined her new life. There was laundry to organize, supply manifests to review, and a dozen other responsibilities that would keep her busy while the SEALs prepared for an operation that might prove more dangerous than any of them suspected. That night, as Sarah lay in her narrow bunk listening to the sounds of the base settling into darkness, she tried to push away the growing sense of unease that had been building all day. She told herself that the SEALs were professionals who knew their business, that her concerns were probably unfounded, and that her job was to support their mission, not second-guess their tactics. But sleep came slowly, and, when it finally arrived, it brought dreams of mountain ridges and scope crosshairs, of enemies who moved like shadows and friends who never made it home. In her dreams, Staff Sergeant Sarah Ghost Martinez was still alive, still deadly, and still responsible for keeping good soldiers alive in a world where death could come from any direction at any distance. She had no way of knowing that within 72 hours, those dreams would become reality, and the invisible woman who served their meals would become the only thing standing between 12 of America's finest warriors and a carefully orchestrated massacre that had been months in the planning. The mission briefing took place at 0200 hours in the secure conference room that doubled as the base's tactical operations center. Sarah wasn't supposed to be there, but her role as support coordinator sometimes required her presence during planning sessions to coordinate logistics and equipment needs. She sat quietly in the back corner, tablet in hand, taking notes about supply requirements and transportation needs while the real planning unfolded around her. Lieutenant Commander Richardson stood before a large digital display showing satellite imagery of the target area. The village of Kawar Kili nestled in a valley 12 kilometers northeast of FOB Chapman, surrounded by rocky hills and connected to the outside world by a single dirt road that wound through the mountains like a serpent's back. Intelligence indicated that Ahmad Shah Massoud, a mid-level Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks throughout the region, would be present in the village for a meeting with local tribal leaders. The intelligence had come through multiple channels over the past week, each source confirming details about Massoud's location and activities. Drone surveillance had identified increased activity in the village, with several vehicles arriving and departing in patterns consistent with a high-level meeting. Electronic intercepts had captured communications references to an important gathering, and human intelligence assets had provided specific details about the compound where Massoud would be staying. Chief Thompson outlined the operational plan with the precision that marked all SEAL operations. The team would insert via helicopter at a landing zone 2 kilometers south of the village, approach on foot under cover of darkness, and establish a perimeter around the target compound. Simultaneous breaches would be conducted at multiple entry points to maximize speed and minimize the target's opportunity to escape or destroy valuable intelligence materials. The timeline was tight but manageable. Insertion at 0300 hours, movement to target by 0400, assault commencing at 0430, and extraction no later than 0530 to ensure they were clear of the area before dawn brought increased enemy activity and reduced coalition air support effectiveness. Backup plans were established for various contingencies, including alternative extraction sites and emergency medical evacuation procedures. As Sarah listened to the briefing, her unease continued to grow. The intelligence was almost too good, too detailed, too conveniently timed. In her experience, high-value targets didn't announce their presence so obviously, and Taliban commanders who had survived years of coalition operations were typically much more careful about their security arrangements. She found herself studying the satellite imagery with the trained eye of someone who had spent years hunting enemies in similar terrain. The village's position in the valley created natural choke points that would be ideal for an ambush. The single-access road could easily be blocked, trapping any forces inside the valley. The surrounding hills provided excellent overwatch positions for snipers or mortar teams, and the rocky terrain would make movement difficult for anyone trying to escape on foot. Most troubling was the timing. The intelligence suggested that Massoud would be present for only one night, creating a narrow window for the operation that left little room for delays or complications. In Sarah's experience, operations that had to be executed on such rigid timelines often played into enemy hands, forcing friendly forces to move predictably and abandon careful planning in favor of speed. But Sarah was acutely aware that her concerns came from a perspective that no one in the room shared or would welcome. These SEALs had successfully executed dozens of similar operations, and their confidence was built on a foundation of proven success. They had been trained to be aggressive, to trust their intelligence, and to close with the enemy quickly and decisively. These instincts had served them well throughout their careers, and they had no reason to doubt them now. Petty Officer Collins, the team sniper, asked about enemy force estimates and defensive positions. Intelligence suggested minimal Taliban presence in the village itself, with most enemy fighters based in compounds several kilometers away. The assessment painted a picture of a lightly defended target that could be neutralized quickly and efficiently, exactly the kind of operation that played to SEAL strengths. As the briefing concluded, Sarah made notes about the equipment and supplies that would be needed for the mission. Night vision devices, additional ammunition, specialized communications equipment, and medical supplies were all added to her logistics checklist. She would spend the next several hours ensuring that everything was properly prepared and loaded onto the helicopters that would carry the team to their destiny. The hours between the briefing and mission execution passed with the controlled tension that always preceded major operations. The SEALs conducted final equipment checks, reviewed their individual assignments, and went through the mental preparation rituals that each had developed over years of combat operations. Some wrote letters home, others listened to music, and a few simply sat quietly, focusing their minds on the challenges ahead. Sarah found herself busier than usual, handling last-minute requests for additional equipment and coordinating with the aviation unit that would provide insertion and extraction support. The work helped distract her from the growing sense that something was fundamentally wrong with the entire operation, but couldn't entirely suppress the instincts that had kept her alive through 3 combat tours. At 2,245 hours, she made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. Sarah approached Lieutenant Commander Richardson as he conducted final preparations with his team, her heart pounding with the knowledge that she was about to cross a line she had sworn never to cross again. "Sir," she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the noise of helicopter engines spinning up outside. "I need to speak with you about the mission." Richardson looked up from his map, surprise evident on his face. In 3 weeks, the civilian contractor had barely spoken to him beyond the basic pleasantries required by military courtesy. "What is it, Ms. Martinez?" "We're about to step off." Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would either save lives or destroy the careful anonymity she had built over the past 3 years. "Sir, I have combat experience in this region. The intelligence pattern for this mission concerns me. The timing, the location, the ease of access to a high-value target. In my experience, operations that seem this straightforward are often anything but that." Richardson's expression shifted from surprise to barely concealed irritation. The last thing he needed before a major operation was a nervous civilian contractor second-guessing intelligence that had been thoroughly vetted by multiple agencies. "Ms. Martinez, I appreciate your concern, but we have extensive intelligence on this operation. The target is legitimate, the intelligence is solid, and my team is ready. We've done this before." "Sir, I understand that, but the village location creates natural ambush positions. The single-access road can be easily blocked. The timing forces you to move predictably. I've seen this pattern before, and it usually means the enemy knows you're coming." Chief Thompson had been listening to the conversation with growing annoyance. "Ma'am, with all due respect, intelligence analysis and tactical planning are our job. We appreciate your support, but this isn't your area of expertise." Sarah felt the familiar frustration of having crucial information dismissed by people who outranked her but lacked her specific experience. "Chief, I spent 5 years hunting targets in this exact type of terrain. I know how the enemy thinks, how they set traps, how they exploit coalition overconfidence. This mission has all the hallmarks of a carefully planned ambush." Richardson checked his watch, noting that they were now running behind schedule. The helicopters were ready, his men were prepared, and the mission window was narrow. "Ms. Martinez, I appreciate your experience, but we have to go. The intelligence has been verified through multiple sources, and delaying the mission isn't an option." As the SEAL team filed toward the helicopters, Sarah made one final attempt to voice her concerns. "Sir, at least consider alternative extraction sites. Don't use the primary route out of the valley. The enemy will expect you to exit the same way you enter." But her words were lost in the roar of helicopter engines and the focused intensity of warriors preparing for battle. Within minutes, the aircraft lifted off into the Afghanistan night, carrying 12 of America's finest soldiers toward a rendezvous that had been carefully orchestrated by an enemy who understood exactly how elite forces operated. Sarah stood on the landing pad watching the helicopters disappear into darkness, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She had tried to warn them, had attempted to share insights that might save their lives, but had been politely dismissed as an overcautious civilian contractor who didn't understand the realities of special operations warfare. As she walked back toward the base, Sarah's mind was already calculating distances, terrain features, and tactical options. If her instincts were correct, and the SEALs were walking into a carefully prepared trap, they would need help that no one was prepared to provide. The nearest coalition forces were hours away, air support would be limited in the darkness, and the mountainous terrain would make communication difficult. For the first time in 3 years, Sarah found herself thinking like Staff Sergeant Martinez again, analyzing the tactical situation with the cold precision that had made her the military's most lethal sniper. She thought about her personal equipment, locked away in storage containers that she hadn't opened since arriving at FOB Chapman. Her rifle, her scope, her range-finding equipment, all carefully maintained but unused, waiting for a day she had hoped would never come. The next several hours would determine whether her civilian contractor facade would finally be shattered, whether Staff Sergeant Sarah Ghost Martinez would be forced to emerge from retirement to save the lives of soldiers who had dismissed her warnings as the concerns of an inexperienced civilian. As she reached her quarters, Sarah paused at the storage locker that contained the tools of her former trade. The lock was simple, and her hands remembered the combination despite 3 years of disuse. Inside, wrapped in protective covers and carefully preserved, lay the components of the most effective long-range weapons system she had ever used. She hadn't touched the Barrett M82 rifle since her final tour ended, had sworn that she would never again look through a scope with the intent to take a human life. But, as she stood there in the darkness, listening to radio chatter from the helicopters carrying the SEAL team toward what might be their deaths, Sarah began to consider the possibility that some promises were meant to be broken. The mission was scheduled to last no more than 2.5 hours from insertion to extraction. If everything went according to plan, the team would be back at FOB Chapman before dawn with their target captured or eliminated and valuable intelligence gathered. But Sarah's instincts, honed by years of combat and validated by countless successful missions, were screaming that nothing about this operation would go according to plan. She closed the storage locker without removing anything, but the knowledge of what lay inside provided a strange comfort. If her worst fears proved correct, if the SEALs found themselves trapped in a carefully orchestrated ambush with no way out, then Staff Sergeant Martinez might have one final mission to complete. The radio in the operations center would keep her informed of the mission's progress. Standard check-ins were scheduled every 30 minutes, with immediate updates if contact was made with enemy forces. For now, all she could do was wait, monitor the radio traffic, and hope that her years of experience had made her overly cautious rather than prophetically accurate. But, deep in her heart, Sarah knew that within hours, the invisible woman who served meals and coordinated supplies would be forced to become the deadly sniper she had tried so hard to leave behind. The first sign that something was wrong came at 0347 hours, 17 minutes after the scheduled first check-in. The radio in the FOB Chapman Operations Center crackled with static, then fell silent. Sarah, who had been monitoring communications from her position near the duty officer's desk, felt her stomach clench with familiar dread. Raven 6, this is Chapman Base, radio check, over. The communications specialist's voice carried the professional calm that masked growing concern. Standard protocol called for check-ins every 30 minutes, and SEAL Team 7 had never missed a scheduled communication in 3 weeks of operations. Static filled the radio frequency, broken only by the distant atmospheric interference that plagued communications in the mountainous regions of Afghanistan. Sarah checked her watch again, noting that 18 minutes had now passed since the last successful communication. In her experience, radio silence usually meant one of 3 things: equipment failure, enemy jamming, or the team was in contact and unable to transmit. The duty officer, Captain Michael Stevens, authorized additional attempts to establish communication while simultaneously notifying higher headquarters of the potential problem. Backup frequencies were tried, alternative communication methods were attempted, and aviation assets were tasked to overfly the area to provide visual confirmation of the team's status. Sarah found herself gripping the edge of the communications desk as the minutes ticked by without response from Raven 6. Her instincts, which had been screaming warnings since the mission briefing, now felt validated in the worst possible way. The pattern she had recognized, the convenient intelligence, the perfect timing, the isolated location, was playing out exactly as she had feared. At 0355 hours, exactly 55 minutes after insertion, the radio finally crackled to life with a transmission that made everyone in the operations center freeze. Chapman Base, this is Raven 6. Chief Thompson's voice was tight with stress and punctuated by the unmistakable sound of gunfire in the background. We are taking heavy fire from multiple positions. The target compound was empty. This is an ambush. We are pinned down and taking casualties. The operations center erupted in controlled chaos as officers and enlisted personnel began implementing emergency response procedures. Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that accompanied crisis situations, her mind automatically shifting into the analytical mode that had kept her alive through countless firefights. Raven 6, what is your current position? Captain Stevens demanded, his training taking over despite the shock of hearing that one of the military's most elite units had been trapped. We're approximately 800 meters north of the primary target, in a compound that overlooks the valley floor. Thompson's transmission was broken by static and the sound of explosions. Enemy has the high ground on 3 sides. They knew we were coming. They were waiting for us. Sarah closed her eyes, visualizing the terrain around Kawar Kili village from the satellite imagery she had studied during the mission briefing. 800 meters north of the target would place the SEAL team in an isolated compound surrounded by higher ground, exactly the kind of position that any competent enemy force would use to trap coalition forces. How many enemy? Stevens asked, while simultaneously coordinating with the duty operations officer to scramble emergency response assets. Unknown. Multiple firing positions in the rocks above us. They have us bracketed with mortars and at least 2 heavy machine gun positions. We have 2 men down, 1 serious. The sound of automatic weapons fire nearly drowned out Thompson's words. Sarah's mind raced through the tactical implications of what she was hearing. The enemy had successfully lured the SEALs into a predetermined kill zone, had established overlapping fields of fire, and possessed the high ground advantage that made escape extremely difficult. Worse, the team's position 800 meters from the target meant they were further from their planned extraction point, complicating any rescue attempt. Raven 6, can you move to alternate extraction site Bravo? Stevens asked, referring to a secondary helicopter landing zone that had been identified during mission planning. Negative. Enemy has observation and fire superiority over all approaches to Bravo. We're effectively surrounded. The desperation in Thompson's voice was evident despite his professional training. We need immediate close air support and emergency extraction. Captain Stevens was already coordinating with higher headquarters to scramble available aircraft, but Sarah knew from experience that help was still hours away. The nearest Apache attack helicopters were stationed at Bagram Airfield, more than 200 kilometers away. Even if they departed immediately, it would be at least 90 minutes before they arrived on station, and that assumed optimal weather and no mechanical delays. The SEAL team didn't have 90 minutes. From the sounds of the firefight transmitting over the radio, they might not have 90 seconds. Chapman Base, we are taking accurate sniper fire from the ridgeline. Richardson's voice cut through the chaos, confirming Sarah's worst fears. They have at least 1 precision shooter with clear observation of our position. Every time we try to move, he puts rounds right on target. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach as she processed this information. An enemy sniper with observation of the SEAL position meant that any attempt to move or escape would be met with deadly accurate fire. It also meant that any rescue helicopter attempting to land in the area would be vulnerable to precision shooting that could bring down aircraft and kill aircrew. The tactical situation was rapidly becoming hopeless. The SEALs were trapped in a compound surrounded by enemy forces with superior positioning, adequate ammunition, and apparently detailed knowledge of coalition tactics and capabilities. Even if close air support arrived, the proximity of enemy and friendly forces would make effective engagement extremely difficult without risking friendly fire casualties. Raven 6, What is your ammunition status? Stevens asked, though Sarah suspected he already knew what the answer would be. We're burning through ammo fast. Maybe 20 minutes of sustained fire remaining. Thompson's response confirmed the desperate nature of their situation. Enemy forces are maneuvering to cut off our northern escape route. We need help now. Sarah looked around the operations center, noting the grim expressions on the faces of the experienced military personnel who were trying to coordinate a rescue mission that everyone understood might be impossible to execute successfully. The enemy had planned this operation carefully, had anticipated coalition response capabilities, and had positioned themselves to exploit every advantage that the terrain and tactical situation provided. For the first time in 3 years, Sarah felt the familiar weight of responsibility that came with possessing skills that could save soldiers' lives. She thought about the Barrett M82 rifle in her storage locker, about the scope that could accurately engage targets at ranges well beyond what standard military rifles could reach, about the training and experience that had made her the most effective sniper in modern military history. But she also thought about the promise she had made to herself when she left active duty, the vow that she would never again look through a scope with the intent to take a human life. The psychological cost of her previous service had been enormous, and she had worked hard to build a new identity that didn't require her to kill. Chapman Base, we have movement on the eastern ridge. Richardson's voice carried new urgency. Large group of fighters moving into position. They're setting up for a final assault. The radio transmission galvanized everyone in the operations center. Sarah watched Captain Stevens coordinate with aviation units, artillery batteries, and quick reaction forces, but she could see in his expression that he knew what she knew: help wouldn't arrive in time. Raven 6, hold your position and conserve ammunition, Stevens ordered. Close air support is inbound, estimated time of arrival 75 minutes. 75 minutes. Sarah did the mathematics automatically, calculating ammunition expenditure rates against enemy assault timelines against available escape routes. The numbers didn't work. The SEALs would be overrun long before help arrived, and 12 of America's finest warriors would be killed or captured by an enemy that had outmaneuvered and outfought them. Unless someone with the right skills and equipment could intervene. Sarah stood up from her position near the communications desk, her decision crystallizing with the clarity that had always marked her most critical moments in combat. 3 years of carefully constructed civilian life was about to be shattered, but 12 lives hung in the balance, and she was the only person within range who possessed the capabilities to tip the odds in their favor. "Sir," she said quietly to Captain Stevens, her voice carrying an authority that hadn't been present in any of her previous interactions with base personnel. "I need access to my personal equipment, and I need transportation to Observation Post 3. Stevens looked at her with confusion mixed with irritation. Observation Post 3 was an abandoned coalition position on a ridgeline 6 kilometers northeast of the base, offering clear observation over the valley where the SEALs were trapped. It was also exposed, dangerous, and absolutely no place for a civilian contractor. "Ms. Martinez, this is not the time for civilian personnel to Captain," Sarah interrupted, her voice now carrying the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to command authority. "I'm not a civilian contractor. I'm Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez, United States Army, retired. My military occupational specialty was 11B40, Special Operations Sniper. I have 147 confirmed kills and 3 tours in this exact area of operations." The operations center fell silent except for the continued radio chatter from the trapped SEAL team. Stevens stared at Sarah as if seeing her for the first time, trying to reconcile the quiet, invisible woman who had served their meals for 3 weeks with the confident, deadly professional who now stood before him. "I have the equipment and skills to provide precision fire support from OP3, Sarah continued, her transformation from contractor to warrior now complete. "Those men are going to die unless someone evens the odds. I can be their guardian angel, but I need transportation and I need it now." Stevens looked at the radio, where Thompson's increasingly desperate transmissions painted a picture of impending disaster, then back at Sarah, whose demeanor had changed so completely that she seemed like an entirely different person. "What do you need?" he asked. Within 15 minutes of revealing her true identity, Sarah Martinez was no longer recognizable as the quiet civilian contractor who had spent 3 weeks invisibly supporting base operations. She moved with the efficient precision of a professional warrior, her 3 years of carefully constructed anonymity stripped away to reveal the deadly operator underneath. Her personal equipment, retrieved from storage containers that had remained unopened since her arrival at FOB Chapman, transformed her appearance as much as her demeanor had changed. The Barrett M82 rifle, meticulously maintained despite years of disuse, was a 50 caliber precision weapon capable of engaging targets at distances exceeding 2,000 meters. Her Leupold scope, custom configured and zero-checked to her exact specifications, could resolve human-sized targets at ranges that made most military snipers uncomfortable. The body armor, load-bearing equipment, and communications gear completed the transformation. Sarah checked each piece of equipment with the automatic efficiency of someone who had performed these preparations hundreds of times under combat conditions. Her hands moved without conscious direction, muscle memory taking over as she verified ammunition counts, adjusted scope settings, and confirmed that every component of her weapons system was functioning perfectly. Captain Stevens had initially been skeptical of her claims, but watching her handle the specialized equipment with obvious expertise had convinced him that Staff Sergeant Martinez was exactly who she claimed to be. A quick check with personnel databases confirmed her service record, her decorations, and her security clearance status. More importantly, it confirmed that she possessed skills that no one else within 200 kilometers could match. "How long since you fired for effect?" Stevens asked as Sarah completed her equipment preparations. 3 years, 4 months, 12 days, she replied without hesitation. The precision of her answer revealed both the significance of that final shot and the weight that the decision to stop killing had carried for her. The transportation to Observation Post 3 was provided by a modified Humvee driven by Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, a Special Forces veteran who had volunteered for the dangerous mission when he learned about Sarah's background. The 6-kilometer journey took them through territory that was technically secure but could become hostile without warning, especially given the enemy activity in the surrounding area. Sarah spent the drive studying topographical maps and satellite imagery, calculating distances, wind patterns, and sight lines from OP3 to the valley where the SEALs were trapped. The abandoned observation post occupied a commanding position on a rocky ridgeline that offered clear lines of sight over a 20-kilometer area, which was exactly why coalition forces had originally established it before being forced to withdraw due to persistent enemy attacks. Radio communications during the drive painted an increasingly desperate picture of the situation in Kawar-Kili Valley. The enemy assault had not yet commenced, but enemy forces were clearly maneuvering into final attack positions while maintaining steady pressure on the trapped SEAL team. Ammunition was running low, 2 men remained wounded, and every attempt to break out of the surrounded compound had been met with accurate fire from the enemy sniper position. Chapman Base, we have visual on approximately 30 enemy fighters moving into assault positions. Richardson's transmission was punctuated by the sound of incoming mortar rounds. The sniper on the eastern ridge is keeping us pinned down. Every time we try to move, he puts rounds right on target. Sarah listened to the radio traffic while calculating engagement angles from OP3. The eastern ridge that Richardson mentioned would be clearly visible from her intended firing position, and the range would be well within the effective capabilities of her rifle system. If she could identify and eliminate the enemy sniper, it would give the SEALs the mobility they needed to either reach an extraction point or establish a more defensible position. Observation Post 3 had been abandoned for 8 months, and it showed. The defensive positions were partially collapsed, equipment had been stripped or destroyed, and the entire facility had the hollow feel of a place where violence had occurred. Sarah ignored the abandoned structures and focused on establishing a firing position that offered maximum visibility while providing adequate concealment from enemy observation. The ridgeline position was perfect for her purposes. At an elevation of nearly 3,000 meters above sea level, it provided commanding observation over the entire valley system where the battle was taking place. The range to the eastern ridge where the enemy sniper was positioned measured exactly 1,847 meters on her laser rangefinder, well within her effective engagement envelope. Sarah established her firing position with the methodical care that had characterized her entire military career. The rifle was positioned on a stable bipod, the scope was adjusted for range and atmospheric conditions, and backup equipment was arranged for immediate access. Every detail was checked and rechecked, because at these distances, minor errors could mean the difference between successful engagement and complete mission failure. Through her scope, the valley below appeared as a detailed diorama of tactical violence. She could clearly see muzzle flashes from the compound where the SEALs were trapped, could identify the specific building they were defending, and could trace the positions of enemy forces as they moved through the rocky terrain surrounding their target. Most importantly, she could see the eastern ridge where the enemy sniper had established his position. Through her scope, magnified 25 times and stabilized against the rocky outcrop she was using as a firing rest, Sarah could make out the carefully camouflaged hide where her counterpart was operating. He was good, she had to admit. His position was well concealed, offered excellent observation and fields of fire, and was positioned to make any coalition rescue attempt extremely dangerous. But he had made one critical error. His hide was oriented entirely toward the valley floor where the SEALs were trapped. He had not considered the possibility of engagement from the ridgeline to his northwest, had not prepared alternate positions, and was now completely vulnerable to attack from Sarah's location. "Ghost has eyes on target," she transmitted over the radio, using her old call sign for the first time in 3 years. The words felt strange in her mouth, bringing back memories and responsibilities she had tried to forget. "Ghost, this is Chapman Base," Captain Stevens responded. "Confirm you have positive identification on the enemy sniper position." Sarah adjusted her scope slightly, bringing the target into perfect focus. Through the powerful magnification, she could see details that would be invisible to the naked eye. The enemy sniper was using a Russian-made Dragunov rifle, was wearing woodland camouflage that was effective for local terrain, and was positioned behind a carefully constructed rock barrier that provided excellent protection from direct fire. "Positive identification confirmed," she transmitted. "Single shooter in prepared position on eastern ridge. Range 1,847 meters. I have a clear shot." What Sarah didn't transmit was the recognition that flickered in her mind as she studied the target through her scope. The position was expertly prepared, the camouflage was professional quality, and the shooter's equipment was too sophisticated for typical Taliban fighters. This was a trained sniper, possibly foreign, definitely experienced, and certainly capable of the precision shooting that had kept the SEALs pinned down for the past hour. "Chapman Base, enemy assault appears to be commencing." Thompson's voice carried new urgency over the radio. "Multiple groups moving toward our position. We need that sniper taken out now." Sarah settled into her firing position, her body automatically assuming the stable, relaxed posture that had become second nature during her years of active service. Her breathing slowed and deepened, her heart rate decreased, and her mind entered the focused state that eliminated everything except the target and the shot. Through her scope, she watched the enemy sniper as he engaged targets in the valley below. She could see his muzzle flash, could track his movements as he shifted between predetermined firing positions, could observe the professional methodology that marked him as a serious threat to any coalition personnel in the area. The mathematics of long-range shooting ran automatically through her mind. Wind speed and direction, atmospheric pressure, temperature, humidity, range, target movement, and a dozen other variables were processed and integrated into the firing solution. At 1,847 meters, the bullet would take approximately 2.3 seconds to reach the target, during which time wind drift and target movement could affect the outcome. Sarah's finger found the trigger, applying the steady, straight-back pressure that she had practiced thousands of times. The Barrett M82 was a powerful rifle that required respect and precision, but in her hands it became an extension of her will, a tool for projecting lethal force across distances that seemed almost magical to those unfamiliar with precision shooting. She controlled her breathing, timing the shot for the natural respiratory pause that would minimize movement. Through the scope, the target remained steady, unaware of the crosshairs that had found their mark. For a moment that seemed to last forever, Sarah hesitated, remembering her promise to herself that she would never again take a human life. But, in the valley below, 12 American warriors were fighting for their lives against overwhelming odds. Men who had families, dreams, and futures that would be cut short if she failed to act. The enemy sniper who held them pinned was a professional killer whose elimination would save American lives and, potentially end the ambush that threatened to become a massacre. "Chapman Base, we are taking heavy casualties." Richardson's desperate transmission made her decision for her. They're inside the compound. We need help now. Sarah's finger completed its movement on the trigger. The Barrett M82 fired with a thunderous crack that echoed across the mountains, sending a .50 caliber bullet across nearly 2 kilometers of Afghan airspace at a velocity that would cover the distance in just over 2 seconds. Through her scope, she watched the bullet impact exactly where she had aimed. The enemy sniper's position erupted in a spray of rock fragments and debris. When the dust settled, there was no movement, no return fire, and no further threat from the eastern ridge position that had dominated the battlefield for the past hour. Target eliminated, Sarah transmitted, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what had just occurred. Enemy sniper is down. The effect on the tactical situation was immediate and dramatic. Freed from the precise, deadly fire that had kept them pinned in place, the SEALs were finally able to maneuver within their compound and begin engaging the enemy forces that were closing on their position. Chapman Base, this is Raven 6. Richardson's voice carried new energy and hope. The sniper fire has stopped. We can move. We're engaging the assault force. But Sarah was already shifting her scope to identify additional targets. Through her powerful optics, she could see enemy fighters moving through the rocks surrounding the SEAL position, could identify crew-served weapons that posed threats to any rescue attempt, and could observe command and control elements that were coordinating the ongoing assault. Staff Sergeant Sarah Ghost Martinez was back in action, and the enemy was about to learn why she had once been considered the most dangerous sniper in the American military. The quiet woman who had served their meals was gone, replaced by a precision killer who had just announced her presence on the battlefield in the most decisive way possible. The battle for Kawar-Kili Valley had taken a dramatic turn, but it was far from over. Sarah had eliminated the most immediate threat to the trapped SEALs, but dozens of enemy fighters remained in the area, and close air support was still more than an hour away. The next phase of the engagement would determine whether her intervention had been enough to save 12 American lives, or whether additional measures would be required. The elimination of the enemy sniper transformed the tactical situation in Kawar-Kili Valley, but Sarah knew that her work was just beginning. Through her scope, she could observe at least 25 enemy fighters still maneuvering toward the SEAL position, and radio intercepts suggested that additional reinforcements were en route to the area. One successful shot had given the trapped Americans breathing room, but it would take sustained, precise fire to keep them alive until rescue arrived. Ghost, this is Raven 6, Richardson's voice carried gratitude mixed with amazement. Outstanding shot. Can you provide continued overwatch while we attempt to reach Extraction Point Charlie? Sarah studied the terrain between the SEAL compound and the alternate extraction site through her scope. Extraction Point Charlie was a small clearing approximately 800 meters southeast of their current position, but the route was dominated by rocky outcroppings that provided excellent concealment for enemy fighters. Moving 12 men across that distance under fire would require suppressive support that only precision shooting could provide. Raven 6, I have eyes on multiple enemy positions along your route to Charlie, she transmitted while identifying targets through her scope. I can provide precision fires, but you'll need to move in small groups and follow my directions exactly. What followed was a deadly game of chess played across 2 kilometers of Afghan mountainside. Sarah became the eyes and guardian angel for the SEAL team, using her elevated position and powerful optics to identify threats that would be invisible to the men moving through the valley below. Her rifle spoke with measured precision, each shot carefully calculated to eliminate specific threats while conserving ammunition for the prolonged engagement that lay ahead. At 1,650 meters, she engaged an enemy machine gun team that was attempting to establish an overwatch position on the southern ridge. The .50 caliber bullet disintegrated their weapon and scattered the survivors, eliminating a threat that could have made the SEAL movement impossible. At 1,423 meters, she targeted an enemy fighter who was positioning an RPG launcher to engage the compound the SEALs were preparing to leave. The shot arrived just as he was raising the weapon to his shoulder, preventing a rocket attack that might have killed or wounded several team members. At 2,111 meters, near the maximum effective range of her weapons system, she engaged what appeared to be an enemy commander who was coordinating the assault through hand signals and radio communications. The extreme distance made the shot challenging, requiring precise calculations for wind drift and bullet drop, But her round found its mark and disrupted the enemy's command and control capabilities. Each shot was a tactical decision that affected the overall flow of the battle. Sarah wasn't simply killing enemy fighters, she was systematically dismantling the coordinated assault that had been designed to overwhelm the SEAL team through superior numbers and positioning. By eliminating key personnel and weapons systems, she was turning a coherent enemy plan into a collection of confused, leaderless fighters who were increasingly reluctant to expose themselves to her deadly accurate fire. "Ghost, this is incredible shooting," Chief Thompson transmitted during a brief pause in the movement. "Where did you learn to shoot like this?" "Same place you learned to be a SEAL, Chief," Sarah replied while scanning for additional targets. "Hard work, good teachers, and lots of practice." What she didn't mention was the cost of developing such skills. Each successful shot was adding to a psychological burden that she had spent 3 years trying to escape. The familiar satisfaction of a perfectly executed engagement was mixed with the knowledge that she was once again taking human lives, that she was returning to a role she had worked desperately to leave behind. But watching the SEALs move with newfound confidence through terrain that had been a death trap just minutes earlier reminded her why she had developed these skills in the first place. Every enemy fighter she eliminated was one less threat to American soldiers, every successful shot was a life saved rather than a life taken. "Ghost, we're taking fire from a position approximately 400 meters to our northeast," Richardson reported as the team attempted to cross an exposed stretch of ground. "Can you identify the source?" Sarah scanned the indicated area through her scope, searching for muzzle flashes or movement that would reveal enemy positions. The magnification and clarity of her optics allowed her to see details that would be impossible to discern from the SEAL position, but the enemy fighters were learning to be more cautious about exposing themselves. After several minutes of careful observation, she spotted movement behind a boulder formation that overlooked the SEAL's intended route. 2 fighters were positioned with what appeared to be a light machine gun, waiting for the Americans to move into their kill zone. "Target identified," she transmitted. 2 personnel with crew-served weapon in rocks northeast of your position. Stand by for engagement." The range was 1,789 meters, requiring careful adjustment for wind and elevation. Sarah's first shot struck the boulder just inches from the primary target, sending rock fragments in all directions and forcing both enemy fighters to seek better cover. Her second shot, adjusted for the near miss, found its intended target and eliminated the immediate threat to the SEAL movement. "Target neutralized," she reported. "Continue movement to Charlie." The pattern continued for the next 47 minutes as the SEAL team fought their way through the carefully planned ambush zone toward the extraction point. Sarah's rifle became their guardian angel, reaching out across impossible distances to eliminate threats before they could develop into serious problems. Her precision fire created corridors of safety through terrain that had been designed to become a killing ground for American forces. By 05:10 hours, the SEALs had reached extraction point Charlie and established a defensive perimeter while waiting for helicopter pickup. The original 12-man team had been reduced to 10 effective fighters, with 2 men seriously wounded but alive thanks to the suppressive fire that had allowed them to move under cover. More importantly, they were in a position where helicopter extraction was possible without the aircraft being vulnerable to the kind of precision fire that had originally trapped them. "Chapman Base, this is Raven 6, Richardson transmitted with obvious relief. We have reached extraction point Charlie and are ready for pickup. Request immediate medevac for 2 casualties." Raven 6, extraction helicopters are inbound, estimated time of arrival 12 minutes, Captain Stevens responded. "Ghost, outstanding work. You saved American lives today." Sarah continued scanning the area around the extraction site through her scope, searching for any remaining threats that might endanger the rescue helicopters. Her ammunition was running low after nearly an hour of sustained precision fire, but she had enough rounds remaining to deal with any last-minute complications. Through her radio earpiece, she could hear the approaching sound of helicopter rotors as the extraction aircraft closed on the landing zone. The UH-60 Black Hawks would be vulnerable during the pickup, requiring several minutes on the ground while loading wounded personnel and equipment. Any enemy forces in the area would recognize this as their final opportunity to inflict casualties on the American forces. As the first helicopter approached the landing zone, Sarah spotted movement on a ridgeline approximately 1,200 meters from the extraction site. Through her scope, she could see an enemy fighter positioning what appeared to be a shoulder-fired surface-to-air missile, probably an SA-7 or similar system capable of bringing down the rescue helicopters. "All stations, this is Ghost," she transmitted urgently. "Surface-to-air missile threat at extraction site. Helicopter, aboard approach." The Black Hawk pilot immediately pulled up from his landing approach while Sarah engaged the missile operator with her remaining ammunition. Her shot was rushed, fired under time pressure that didn't allow for optimal positioning, but it was effective enough to disrupt the missile shot and force the enemy fighter to abandon his position. "Threat eliminated," she reported. "Extraction can proceed." The helicopter landings proceeded without further incident, and, within 8 minutes, all surviving SEALs were aboard aircraft and departing the area. Sarah watched through her scope as the Black Hawks disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness, carrying 12 American warriors who had faced certain death and lived to fight another day. As the sound of helicopter rotors faded into the distance, Sarah found herself alone on the ridgeline with the smoking barrel of her rifle and the weight of decisions that had fundamentally changed her life once again. In the space of 97 minutes, she had fired 19 rounds and eliminated at least 15 enemy fighters, disrupting a carefully planned ambush and saving the lives of an entire SEAL team. The radio crackled with activity as various units reported the successful extraction and began coordinating follow-up operations in the area. But Sarah barely heard the congratulations and recognition flowing over the communications networks. She was thinking about the promise she had broken, about the life she had tried to build, and about the person she would have to become now that her secret was revealed. Staff Sergeant Sarah "Ghost" Martinez was no longer a myth or a memory. She was real, she was deadly, and she was back in the business of keeping American soldiers alive in a world that seemed determined to kill them. 3 weeks later, Sarah received new orders transferring her back to active duty with the 75th Ranger Regiment Sniper School, where her experience would be used to train the next generation of precision marksmen. The invisible woman who had served meals and coordinated supplies was gone forever, replaced by a legend who had proven that some skills, once learned, could never truly be forgotten. The SEALs who had dismissed her warnings as the concerns of an overcautious civilian contractor would never make that mistake again. They had learned that expertise could come in unexpected packages, that heroes didn't always look like what they expected, and that sometimes the most dangerous person on a battlefield was the one nobody noticed until it was too late. In her final report on the incident, Sarah wrote simply that she had provided precision fire support to coalition forces engaged in combat operations. But everyone who had witnessed her performance that night knew they had seen something extraordinary, a master craftsman returning to her art, a guardian angel watching over warriors in their darkest hour, and a reminder that some people are born to stand between good men and those who would do them harm. The quiet woman who had watched silently for 3 weeks had finally spoken, and her words were written in .50 caliber precision across the mountains of Afghanistan. The enemy had learned too late that America's top sniper had never really retired. She had simply been waiting for the moment when her skills would be needed most. And, when that moment came, Sarah Martinez had not hesitated to answer the call.